When you were a little munchkin, your parents told you two things. One of them was, do you know what these two simple commands that you have heard millions of times from your parents? When you're going to cross the street, what do they tell you to do? Look both ways, and then, what's the overall command? Look where you are going. Okay, and you have heard that. Your parents were teaching you jujitsu without you knowing it. Okay, and the other command they gave you when they got upset with you because you were doing something wrong, they said, say it, first word is the same. No, look out, it's too late. Look at what you're doing. Okay, so you've been brought up with these two, what do you call them, mantras or whatever, you know. Look where you're going, look what you're doing. The problem is we've grown up with those two concepts and they get in the way of learning. Okay, because if you look in, particularly in jiu-jitsu, any martial art, any sport, any physical activity, if you look at what you're doing, you cannot look at where you're going. They contradict each other. And you know, when you're working with students, you're trying to get them to move their body and they're stuck looking at what they're trying to do. And because they're looking at what they're trying to do, they can't turn their head to look where they're going, which means their body won't follow. Okay? So we're going to do a couple things at some point before we get done that will help you. This should not be difficult for brown and black belts to do. Lower ranks may find this more challenging, but if you've never done this, we'll do what we can with it. The other thing with what we also have to deal with is the tendency, and my students have heard this up the kazoo, okay? As human beings, we tend to be very conscious of other people's facial expressions. And we rely on those to tell us how upset the person is, whether they're hurting or not. We get a ton of information from people's visual expressions. Okay? Okay, some of you are falling asleep, some of you are intently paying attention, Paul is kind of smiling. Okay, and you can pick up, you know, particularly if you've been a teacher, you look at your class, you know where they're at, okay, or where they aren't at, because we rely on facial expressions for information. And the problem in learning anything, particularly a martial art where you have to turn your body, is that if you're looking at the person's face to see how they're doing, you can't. Not only can you not look at what you're doing, but you can't look where you're going. Okay, so these two things, looking at people's faces and looking at what you're doing, prevent people from looking where they're going. So the trick is to get students away from these two things. Okay, and not looking at people's faces is actually easier to teach them, because you can simply say, don't look at their face, look at where you're going, and that works fairly easy. The problem occurs, and let me use Thomas because he looks vicious this morning. Okay, and he missed class last night. No, okay. The problem is when we teach a technique to a student. Okay. We're telling them, you know, the simple lapel grab. Okay, you're going to grab. You put your thumb between the third and fourth knuckle. You pull to your right. You turn to the left, turning your hand off, palm up. Put your right hand on top of the thumb. Step your right foot forward. Pivot your left foot back, and they should go boom. Okay, and we give. If you do it right, they go boom. But the other problem is that, and one of the things I think one of you two said last night, having to do with the uke. Uke has an important part in learning, for me, learning a technique. In that, hopefully, he knows the technique, and he will cooperate and go through the movement so that I can have an idea of how the technique feels. Okay. And the word feel is a very important concept. Because, and you know this, your students don't because they haven't really figured it out yet. The way you determine a technique is working properly is by what? How do you know if a technique is working properly? Because you're going to get to do this a little later on this morning. I didn't have any blindfolds, but you're going to. How do you know a technique is working properly?
He's gonna tap out if it hurts.
Oh, he's going to tap out if it hurts.
Or he's going to land where you want him to land.
Or he's going to land where you. But these are all. That's visual and audio. Or
You can feel.
you can feel if the technique is working correctly. Okay, and that is one of the hardest things for students to learn is by feel. Okay, and it requires that the uke be somewhat cooperative because the goal is so that you want to learn how a technique feels when it is done properly, and that becomes your sort of like your standard on every technique. And eventually you learn how it feels when the student is moving in the direction you want, and then at that point whatever the attack is or the technique is totally irrelevant. Okay, you know by how things feel. It's one of our fly-by-night students who got confused. Anyway, it's a myth. Okay, so, what we want to do and what we're going to have you do is, I'm going to try and have you take a few steps back, and we're going to do it with this simple technique. Okay, I want you to get up with a partner, someone who has one hand and one arm, okay, and we're going to go through a technique step by step just to backtrack you, okay, to what a new student is trying to do. Okay, uke, you can be cooperative or you can be, just be cooperative, okay, and I just want you to go through the technique step by step. Okay, so find someone, and that's what we're going to do. This is nothing, should not be mentally challenging for anyone. You're doing, which makes it impossible to look where you're going. So how do you get around this so that as Barry said last night when he was doing Ganseki Otoshi? Ganseki Otoshi. Yeah. Harold. You're okay. You're Harold. Okay. When Harold taught that, he said the technique is not step 1, 2, 3, 4. Any technique in any martial art should be one. It's just one smooth movement or series of movements. Okay, so how do you get there? How do you get there with your students? Because they're trying to learn the little mechanics, and you want them to get the bigger picture and make the technique work, and they're concentrating on this. So you have to take it in a 2-step sequence, and this will work while they're learning. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go through the same thing. I want you to set up the technique to where you're just about ready to execute the throw, which is look where you are going. Okay, so I want the uke to grab you. Uke, grab Tori. Okay, set up the Tenagi hand throw, go through that motion, look what you're doing, take the time to look what you're doing. Okay, get his hand turned off, and you're at that point where you're going to pivot. Okay, up until this point you have been looking at what you are doing, and that's okay for students as they're learning, because they haven't gotten the feel thing down yet that all of us possess, and so we think it's really simple to do. Okay, so now you've got this hand set. Life is good. You're ready to go. All I want you to do now is hold on to whatever you got and look where you're going. Just to execute this, I'm trying to get you to look at this from a student's perspective, because we have a tendency to say, oh, you didn't do that right, or execution was lousy. We as sensei tend to generalize and put the whole technique together and say, you screwed up, you did it wrong. Okay, and rather than saying you did it wrong, because they're trying their damnedest to do it right. Okay, unless you have a student who's being, and that's the only kind of a student I would not tolerate in my class, is one who attempted to screw up other people. And you get them, you know, and I bounce those little puppies right out of the class real fast because I won't tolerate it. As long as the student is trying, you know, and I don't care how much they mess up, they're trying. That's all I ask of my students, is that they try, okay? And so if you can be more specific, you know, this is what was done wrong, you know, let's fix it. But if you break it down into the look at what you're doing and look at where you're going, it gets to be a little simpler, okay? And usually it's easier if you teach the look where you are going part first. Turn. You know, you get them all out there and they'll turn. I mean, I rarely do this in my classes, okay? You know, hand throw, pivot back, okay? You get them used to the big body movements, which is why we don't take kids younger than 10 into our program, is because around age 10 they've got large muscle coordination somewhat down, and you can start working with small, because all this is, you know, all this is small muscle coordination, moving the body around, stepping forward, turning your body, okay, all that's large muscle coordination, okay. And that's one reason why little kids sometimes and I've seen little kids in judo programs, they're phenomenal as long as the techniques are kept simple. They do phenomenal. I mean, nothing injures them. They are so flexible, it's criminal. But you're using all those large muscle movements for them that they can do and are developing. Okay. So what you'd have to do in terms of instruction is break it down into look where you're going. What did your parents tell you? Look where you're going. Okay? And then you work on setting up the technique. Now, once they put them together and you say to them, now hold on to this and just look where you're going, what's going to happen? What happens?
Well, if the cookie is set up properly, when you look where you're going and you go there, they have to follow.
Yeah, technique works. Okay? The technique will work. And the student will say, oh my God, or OMG today. You know, how did I do this? Are you okay? You know, they get all these concerns, okay? And are they looking at the person's face? No. Okay? As I tell my students, you don't look at an attacker's face until they're on the ground. And then if you're really smart, you have someone whip out a cell phone, because there are probably several people who have done so already, and you take a headshot of this person, because when you get to court, his attorney, if he has a good one, can really louse you up in terms of being a good eyewitness, even though you're the victim. But you got a headshot, that's him, you know, no doubt, you know. And I'm not being too facetious about it. Okay, so there's only one element left here that we want to cover, and then we're going to do some fun stuff with this, I hope. Okay, the other part is rotation. Getting students to turn their bodies is the toughest job in the world, because, let me borrow Peter here, okay, and I'm going to go through the basic hand throw. I'm going to set it up. Life is good. I've stepped forward, and then I do this. I wonder, why isn't it going? Okay, you said pivot the left foot back, and students do. Okay. What?
They're stiffer than that.
They're stiffer than that. Okay, but the thing is, they don't rotate. Okay, they don't pivot. They don't turn. Okay, and I have a lot of frustration with this as an instructor, because it's hard for me to understand why they don't simply do that. Okay, and part of it comes down to, what did your parents tell you not to do when you were wearing shoes? Until, of course, skateboards came around, which totally blew that concept. Haven't you kids who've had, or any of you had skateboards? No. What? Yeah. And what happened to your shoes?
They got scuffed.
They what?
They got scuffed up.
They got scuffed up. The soles went real fast. Okay. And your parents, you know.
Don't drag your feet.
Don't drag your feet.
But you want us to drag our feet.
Okay.
So we have control.
Okay. Don't drag your feet. What do they say in judo and jiu-jitsu and aikido?
Drag your feet.
Drag, not drag your feet. Slide your feet. Okay. It is hard to slide your foot backwards because there's too much weight. But if you say slide your foot around, somehow that's easier for people to do. Okay? It's just physically, I want you to try this. Just, you put the camera down. I just want you standing here. Okay? And you can do this and have them, and they can turn in different directions, which in a street situation is how you should be turning anyway. So they're learning some, down the road skills right off the bat. Okay, so what I want you to do, and if all of you are out here, you are probably going to run into each other at some point or another, so you've got to be a little careful because this exercise does take room. I want you to start off at one point where you think you're free of other people. Or let's have everyone step up onto this line here. And then we'll work towards back there. Okay, and I want you to start out with your left foot forward. Okay, left tachiwaza. Okay, and I want you to pivot your left foot back and look where you're going. Okay, now pivot your right foot back and look where you're going. Now pivot your left foot back and look where you're going. Okay, pivot your right foot back and look where you're going. Pivot your left foot back and look at where you're going. La wall. Okay, now this is easy for you because you've done it thousands of times, but for students it's hard. And you'll also find out that if you look where you are going, you can pivot or rotate more than if you are doing it this way. Because what are you not doing by going this way? You're not turning your body or your foot. Okay? So you get them to turn, and they actually can turn a lot further than just with a simple pivoting the foot back. Okay, so these are things you can do for rotation and pivoting, and break the instruction down into get the small muscle stuff correct. Look at what you're doing, then look where you are going. Okay, and you shouldn't even have to, if they're getting better at this, you shouldn't have to mention pivot back, because they know they're supposed to pivot back or turn to the left or whatever it is. Okay, now we want to give you a little fun with this. See what you can do. And you're going to have to be honest with yourselves. Okay. I actually thought of this. I was trying to figure out how to do this, and then I didn't think until late last night, I need some blindfolds, but we're not going to go blindfolds. So what's going to happen is, and I'm going to borrow, I'll use Harold, okay, and over here. And what Harold is going to do, I'm going to close my eyes. Now his attack has to be limited to some sort of grab or choke or hold. It doesn't matter what he does. Now you may want to start out with something simple if you've never done this blindfolded, because it's a learning experience. Tori, execute techniques slowly. This is critical for Uke's safety, not yours. Okay. So what I'm going to close my eyes. He's going to some sort of grab or choke, however he wishes. Okay, and I'm simply going to come around and do whatever technique that I plan to do. Eyes closed. Okay. If you don't have your visual ability and you can't feel, this is his arm, this is how the technique should feel, etc. You can't do this because you don't have your eyes to give you all the clues that they normally give you. You're working solely on what? Feel. Okay, and that's where you want your students ultimately to be. For those of you who who haven't been done freestyle kata competition, which is what we do in the AJ. In the black belt division, there are 3 30-second segments. And the first 30 seconds, the black belt, the past several years black belt has been blindfolded. And they actually are pretty good at it. Surprising. I'm impressed at how well some of them, they actually do better blindfolded than they do with the blindfolds off. Because they're relying entirely on feel, which is the way, whether it be judo or aikido, even in karate, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, anything, or ultimately it comes down to how does the technique feel. Okay, and since Jiu-Jitsu is a gentle art, we want you to feel good. So this is a feel-good training. Okay, so what I want you to do is get out with your partner. Okay, and he's going to do whatever he does, or grab, or do whatever you're going to do, okay? And I'm going to come around. Now see, I would also, okay, I'm not going to kick, okay? Okay, take it, okay, and he's going to get up, you're going to keep your eyes closed, he's going to do another attack, okay? Isn't it amazing you know where the head is when they grab with both hands? Okay, okay. And I want you to go through 5 or 6 random attacks. Slowly. Now, the other thing is, we cannot, because my eyes are closed, we can't have all of you up on the mat at the same time. It's a safety factor. You have to give these 2 people a lot of room because I don't know really where I am on the mat. Okay? So we're going to start out with 2 teams, 1 team over there, 1 team over here, okay? And Tori is going to have his eyes closed. Okay. Real rush, I'd say these are the things you've learned, okay? Because teaching in the classroom over the last several years, and fortunately, I mean, I was department chair of my department, and the administration was doing its damnedest to lockstep the instruction in our program, where you walk out of one class and the teacher in the next room completes the sentence. That's called education. And so you would say it, well, I don't think it was either. And one of the things that's happening in education in California now in the past couple of years, they've kind of realized that this doesn't work. And they're going back to telling the teachers, oh, you set up your own lessons and your own lesson plans and you get materials you need. And a lot of the teachers, newer teachers, are having difficulty with that because they weren't trained how to do that. And so now they have to go back and retrain the teachers to be resourceful and be creative and do the things that what teaching is about. But anyway, but if it were a lockstep, I'd say these are the things we learned today. These were our objectives, and yada yada yada. Okay, and because that isn't my personality, I will if I have a lesson that ends at the end of the hour, which they rarely did. Okay, I would say to my students, I'd say, okay, what did you gain from this experience? What did you learn? Because that's a better way for me to find out if they actually got what I was trying to get them to do, rather than me telling them what they should have gotten. Okay, and going blindly forth. So, what did you notice when you were watching some of the other teams working out? What did you notice about them? Not yourself, but about them.
We're reacting with the flow.
Okay, many of you reacted more with the flow of the technique, okay, which requires you need to know the technique, etc. And this is why this really only works well with brown and black belts, okay, for upper ranks, because the lower ranks are still trying to get their act together. Okay, anything else? Was there a greater reliance on any particular type of technique or general category of techniques? Take a guess. Okay. As a teacher, I don't care if you're wrong. I don't care, because you can always find something right in what. Yes.
Sensei, what I learned was if I were going into a larger, quote unquote, larger circle technique like a Teinage, and the uke's hand was getting caught up in my gi, I could have, what I learned was I could have transitioned into, let's say, a Takubishin Waza, which was a less of a turn. Just
Okay.
instead of, I could always do the Teinage, but it would be easier to do it a smaller circle technique.
Okay, so you ultimately had more, this is the C word, you had more control of your uke. Okay. What about losing the visual ability? How did that affect you?
I think one thing it does is gives you a greater awareness of where that person is or what part of the station is.
Okay, good. A greater awareness of where that person is and where his body is. Okay, good.
You rely 100% on the feel.
Pardon?
You rely 100% on the feel.
You're right. You rely on feel. Okay, and that's ideally where you'd love to get your green belts to. Your first new student. Get the feel down. And it's just sad that this really doesn't happen until it really doesn't happen.
I'm not sure if this is particularly responsive to your question, but I'm still in a bit of shock from something you said at the beginning of the class, where the very first thing you had us do was look at what you are doing.
Okay.
And how much you lose the perspective of everything when that's what you're doing. But I remember my instructor, I haven't thought about this in probably 20 years, he used to say, get a picture on the wall. He used to put your nose on the picture. And that's what you can see and make out of the picture.
Okay.
Now step back one step. And now look at the picture, step back one step, you get the idea.
Right.
And as you progress in rank, you're able to step back one and see the whole picture. You put me back with my nose against that picture, and I didn't like it.
No.
It showed me reminded me again where these beginning students really are.
You're right.
And I've been spending, it's been so traumatic, I've been spending this entire session trying to feel and understand now, where are these beginners with all of these things that go on. So
You have to, and that's one reason I went through this process and ended with this, because not being able to use your visual signals takes away the look at what you're doing. It takes away look where you're going. It takes away the L word. And you're left with the, I hope I don't get in trouble here, you're left with the F word. Anyway. Okay. So, don't tell parents we're going to learn the F word today. But anyway. Okay.
Tell your students they're going to learn a word that starts with L and ends with U-C-K.
Okay. But
Also,
yes.
as instructors, we often forget where we came from.
Okay.
And where you're going with kind of thing. And we try and teach to move faster or a shortcut, or we skip some of those little important steps that, like your nose is the picture, that concept that we at one time went through ourselves. Well, now we know the faster way to get there.
Right.
And the faster way to get there is not the faster way to get there.
Right. And one thing you realize as students, you don't necessarily always have to explain the background of what you're doing. At some point you have to, because that's out of respect to the student. Okay? But you don't need to spend a lot of time explaining to them why they're doing something. And I know, and it's a problem most jiu-jitsu instructors have, because our senseis have filled us with so much theoretical information on how to do things, and we want to give this to our students. And sometimes we just have to learn to keep our I'm really guilty of this, and most of us are. We have to learn to keep our mouths shut. and let the students discover some of this stuff on this, and they, oh, sensei, doesn't this work better if, you know, and you say, ah. And I mean, that's the way Seki operated entirely. It was incredibly frustrating to me, because he would, you know, he never showed finer points of anything. But if you got it, he'd say, ah, Joji, you got it. You know, or, ah, oh, you got it. You know, and that was your revelation for the year. But that's how he functioned, you know. So yeah, you have to look at things from the student's perspective as an instructor if you want to do a good job instructing. Now, you said something last night, and Julian, the reason when you were doing your stuff, I had other people watching you. Okay? And you said something last night, and it was the same thing. You did something really beautifully today, which was the goal of what I was after for everyone to do. Some people did it well, others didn't. Paula had to. What was Paul's problem? Paul was going fairly fast. We're going to get to going fairly fast in a moment. But what?
To be fast, you have to go slow.
To what?
To be fast, you have to go slow.
To be fast, you have to go slow. And how are you doing the techniques? What? How are you doing the techniques? What was the word? How did you feel the techniques were going when you were doing them? They were going.
I felt it just right, maybe a bit slow.
Okay, it was slow, but it's another smooth. Smooth and smooth. Right, as smooth as faster. Okay. Now, one of the problems you run into, and if the more you practice this blindfolded, which is actually a better way, because then you aren't worried about keeping your eyes shut, which is a real distraction, you will tend to, if you don't have your visual cues, you tend to be, unless you're really conscious about it, you tend to move a lot faster if you're doing the techniques correctly, because you don't have the visual cues to slow you down. Okay? Which is why uke needs to be a well-trained uke at that point too. Okay? And why you really have to make an effort to go slowly, because if you lose, you know, your vision is a tremendous asset, but it's also in the execution of techniques a tremendous liability, which is why I said at the beginning of this section, what was the first thing your parents told you? Look where you are going, because if you look where you're going, you can't look at the technique that you're executing. Okay? Okay, and if you pick that up here, you know, that's all I was after. Is to get your students to look where they're going. Really don't spend a lot of time looking at what you're doing. I mean, the better they get at the technique, the less time they should have to spend looking at setting it up. Turn, rotate your body. You know, once it's set, you don't need to look at the technique anymore. You look where you were going, and the techniques will be more successful. And as you said, you have to, I had you tried to get you to step back into your students' shoes so that you could kind of see things from their perspective. Anyway.